Yesterday, I had the opportunity to interview legendary Nintendo artist Takaya Imamura, the man whose work was fundamental to games like Star Fox, F-Zero, and, of course, Majora's Mask, on which he worked as the game's art director. During our brief call, I had the chance to ask him about his work on the Zelda series, how he approached designing Majora's Mask's moon, Fierce Deity Link, and Termina itself, and more, like his advice for aspiring indie developers and his thoughts on generative AI art. Imamura worked at Nintendo from 1989 up until 2021, and has since been working on his own personal projects, such as his game, Omega 6: The Triangle Stars. This game was released in Japan at the end of last year, but launched in the West yesterday, February 28th, on both Nintendo Switch and Steam. So my conversation with Imamura-san was chiefly about his newest project, but I was able to talk to him about Zelda too. We obviously speak different languages, so we had a translator on the call, a lovely man called James, and I've dubbed over Imamura's responses with James's English translations for the sake of speeding this video up. Before we jump into the interview, a little bit of context on what Omega 6: The Triangle Stars actually is. Takaya Imamura's latest project is an adventure game set in the same world as his manga, Omega 6, and follows two androids, Thunder and Kyla, created by a genius professor to find a new homeworld for humanity, after Earth is overrun by alien settlers who arrived through a wormhole. It's a very story-driven game, similar in many ways to classic point-and-click adventure games like Monkey Island, and its story and artwork was done by Imamura-san himself. Great to meet you. Before we start, I just wanted to say how much of an inspiration your work has been, not only for myself, but for so many others in the Zelda community. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today. Of course, the main focus of this interview is your new game, Omega 6: The Triangle Stars, which releases today. Congratulations. First off, just how does it feel to have something so personal to you released worldwide?
Feelings-wise, first, thank you for the kind words. As for how I feel, it's an honor. I was very, very happy. Every Nintendo game is released worldwide, so it's not the first time, but doing it has given me a new appreciation of how tough it is to release a game worldwide. But also, it's a lot of hard work, but it's also great fun as well.
So your game features detailed artwork for many locations and characters, which I believe you primarily designed yourself. What led to the decision to go for a pixel art style instead of a style more similar to your manga, on which the game's based?
That's really down to kind of a common theme between the manga, and in that the manga is drawn, the whole setting and everything is science fiction, but it has a retro-futuristic setting. So when it came to doing the game, it's partly in keeping with that theme, but also in that several of the games that I'm known best for date back to the Super Nintendo. So going on a pixel art style rather than a realistic, or at least the same style as the manga, made more sense.
Yeah, I've had the pleasure of playing a little bit of Omega 6 myself, and I definitely felt a lot of similarities to, like you say, games that you worked on the Super Nintendo, especially Star Fox. Obviously, there's been a little while since you designed Star Fox characters. Could you talk a little bit about how the process of creating pixel art has changed over the years?
I think probably the easiest way to explain it would be that back in the days of the Super Nintendo, we were very limited as to what we could do. So the number of colors we could use in a single scene, the number of sprites we could display, we were quite limited in what we could do. And now those limits don't really exist anymore. So it might look like a game from the Super Nintendo era, but in actual fact it was very easy to, it was comparatively easy to make because there are no limitations effectively anymore.
Another thing I wanted to ask you about was that this game is obviously based on your manga, but tells an entirely new story set in the same world. How do you feel about games as vessels for storytelling? And what are the advantages and disadvantages of using this medium compared to things like books or television?
Well, the genre itself, the genre we chose this time, adventure games, they lend themselves very well to telling a story. And the approach I took, as you mentioned, the story for the manga and the story for the game are different, set in the same world, but they're different stories. The approach I took with the game was that I thought there would probably be a wider audience who were interacting with the game as opposed to the manga. So we went with a more comical approach.
So when you play games in your free time, outside of game development, how important are the stories to your enjoyment of them?
So when it comes to me making a game, and I think you can probably say the same for games made by Nintendo in general, the story, while it has some importance, is not the most important thing. But if I'm talking about my personal game playing, like I'll play Dragon Quest, and I certainly play that for the story, and I'm playing it thinking, I'm really enjoying this story. But as a creator, I'm looking at it from a different angle.
I understand. Do you have a game that had a particular favorite story for you, something that really stuck with you?
That would probably be The Witcher 3.
Good choice. So one thing I wanted to ask you about in particular with Omega 6 is it's not just a story-driven adventure game. It also features a turn-based combat system that's built around rock, paper, scissors, of all things. I wanted to ask you how you approached designing the game's combat. Like, how did you build upon such a simple concept to give it depth?
So the concept of using rock, paper, scissors for combat, the core concept itself came from the director of the game. But after that, ideas came in from myself, the director, and all the other members of the development staff.
I'd like to ask you a couple of questions specifically about your time working on The Legend of Zelda before we circle back to some Amiga 6 questions at the end. So first off, you worked on Majora's Mask as the art director. Could you tell us a little bit about what that entailed?
So mainly I was designing the mask, the titular mask, the moon, other things like that. So objects and things that represented, they were like a key design point in the world building. And while doing that, I'd also be overseeing the other artists on the team, looking at what they were producing and making sure it stayed within this world that we were trying to build.
I wanted to ask you about the moon in particular. So I know that you designed the moon and gave it its face, which is quite terrifying, but also quite pained, and it even cries moon's tears as it falls. Did you consider the moon to be something of a reluctant antagonist, like it's being forced to destroy Termina?
Yeah, I mean, rather than having the moon as like the villain or something that was evil, the design, and not just the moon, but the world in general, the direction we were looking to go for was more creepy, weird, odd. This kind of something's not quite right, that kind of atmosphere. And although I came up with the visuals of the moon crying or looking pained, etc., that direction, those ideas came from the director of the game. So I was producing the art to match that.
Okay, I understand. And that definitely comes across, that feeling of something's not quite right, across the whole land of Termina, which obviously seems to be a different world to Hyrule, but features lots of people who all have the same faces as characters Link met in Ocarina of Time. And this has actually started a big debate in the Zelda community on what Termina actually is, whether it's a different world or even a dream. I wanted to ask you what your interpretation of it was and how that influenced the way you approached the art design.
I think it is connected. It's probably, you could call it a different dimension, almost. It's not completely separate, but there is some connection, yeah.
So I know that the first Zelda game that you worked on was A Link to the Past, and you designed not only dungeon maps, but the bosses too. Could you explain what the design process was for creating these bosses?
The process behind it was basically the director would give me would tell me what objects, what items the player would be able to would have with them in this dungeon, what they pick up in the dungeon itself, and then that essentially would be the key to defeating the boss in some way. I'd work together with the programmer, and we'd come up with boss designs in terms of game design and visuals that met those requirements from the director.
I see. So there's sort of an element of reverse engineering in that you're given the solutions the player has, and you're tasked with writing a puzzle that has those solutions.
Yeah, I mean, simply put, it was, if there was for example, if there was a dungeon where you get bombs, the edit to design the boss would be make a boss that you can defeat using bombs.
Okay, and I quite like the Helmasaur King. Do you have a favorite boss that you worked on?
そのリンクトゥザパーストで。
の中で、はい。
いや、ジークロックじゃないわ。何やったっけな。名前忘れちゃった。
One thing I've always wondered that you might know the answer to. Do you know why Link has pink hair in that game?
Back in those days, when I joined that team, I'd only been at the company like 2-3 years. So it was more a case of I just did what I was told. So I got no idea about the deep, if there were any deep reasoning behind the color of the hair. So I got no idea. Sorry.
Another thing I've always wondered is to do with the design choice made in Majora's Mask. When Link plays the Elegy of Emptiness, he can create statues that reflect the form that he's currently in. When he plays the song in human form, however, he'll create a really creepy-looking statue. What was the inspiration behind this statue design?
It's a good question, but I didn't make the statues, and I was the art director, but I didn't necessarily have an overview on absolutely everything in the game itself. So I guess that the artist, whoever put that together, thought that would be a good match for the game's world.
I've seen that there was a Link mask that was meant to be in the game at some point during development. Do you remember anything about this mask or why it was removed?
I don't know. I can't remember, to be honest with you. Maybe there was some plan at some time to have that appear in the game, or maybe there may have been plan to have him become adult Link before he becomes Fierce Deity Link.
So it might have been something that was replaced in favour of the Fierce Deity mask when that was decided to be the ultimate transformation.
Maybe, yeah.
Do you have any stories about how the Fierce Deity itself came about? Because that's such a striking design. It's quite terrifying, really.
It's actually based on I don't know whether you know the traditional Japanese theatre kabuki. That kind of makeup that the actors wear. I like it. It's really cool. So that's where it came from. The original idea for Fierce Deity.
I see. So the makeup is something to make someone more intimidating?
Yes, it's meant to emphasize the emotions and kind of make so in a similar way to the Fierce Deity Link's mask does.
Interesting. And I wonder if there was any deliberate attempts to make this a parallel or perhaps an opposite to the Majora's Mask itself, which I know you designed.
Yeah, I wasn't necessarily intentionally making it a complete polar opposite in design, but you do end up fighting Majora's Mask, and so I did want to make the designs significantly different.
I also wanted to ask you about one of your most famous creations, Tingle. Though he's quite innocent in Majora's Mask, he seems to have a darker side in the Wind Waker. He's initially found in a jail cell, and later on we learn that he seems to have enslaved his brothers to work on his island. In your mind, is Tingle evil or just misunderstood?
Well, actually, Tingle, although I did design Tingle, he's not so much. He's not my character compared to, for example, the Star Fox characters, the F-Zero characters, where I came up with the characters. I also came up with their backgrounds, their backstories, that kind of stuff. With Zelda, I was an artist. Art director on some of the projects, of course, but the actual characters' settings themselves were something that the director or the scenario writer would come up with. So I can't really tell you, I can't really answer your question, but what I can say is that when I'm designing these characters, I'm given a direction to take, come up with some interesting characters around this theme. And that's as far as it goes for my work in terms of Tinkle. But for the players, I'm coming up with the characters before the game is done. But for the players, they're experiencing the game, they're meeting the characters, they're looking at it through a different lens. So you're obviously going to have a different opinion. So for me, I just see Tinkle as the design, whereas the players get to see Tinkle acting as the director or the scenario writer has chosen within the world, within the finished product. So it gives you a different point of view.
Okay. I know you've said before that Tingle's design started as a caricature of someone you knew, perhaps someone in the office. Does this person know how famous, or rather infamous, they've become?
No, because he doesn't know that he was the model for that character.
Do you think he'll ever find out, or is that a secret lost to time?
Maybe not. I mean, he actually left Nintendo quite a while back, and I don't really see him much. So maybe it will be one of these things that just he never knows about.
Okay. But as opposed to Zelda, you must have had a lot more creative control over the characters in Omega 6, which has a massive cast of characters, so big that you had to include a log to keep track of them. Are any of these characters based on people you know, like Tingle was?
Yes, there's a few. There's a few characters in there that are based on some of the people who worked on the game.
Okay. I quite like Headless. Do you have a favourite character in Omega 6?
There's actually a character in there who's looks really horrible, but he actually comes across as saying, I'm a human. He appears in like this. It's not a secret place, but there's a certain place where he will appear in. I'm quite fond of that guy.
Are you more fond of the design you've created for him, or more his personality and kind of hidden layers?
I just like the way he looks. It just looks kind of weird and horrible as well. But the fact that he's there telling people he's human when he's clearly not, but maybe he is in the world that of Omega 6.
And a couple of final questions that I really wanted to ask you, specifically to do with not just Omega 6, but your time and experience in the industry. Would be so valuable to so many people whose own dream it is to create sort of a game as a passion project. So do you have any advice that you'd give to aspiring indie developers or game artists based on your personal experience?
I think if you're coming into the games industry or making games, then there's been so many ideas, new ideas made into games up until now, that I think it'd be very difficult to come up with something new. But rather than coming in with the idea that I want to make a Mario style game, I want to make a Zelda style game, the best advice I could give would be try to come up with something new, something that other people haven't done before.
So I'm an artist myself. I make a lot of traditional and digital pieces. And one thing that I'm personally quite concerned about is the advance of generative AI and the threat that poses to artists. How do you feel about this and the value of human creation over things that machines can make?
I think when it comes to creating art, that people who are doing it are enjoying it. And so people, when another human looks at this art, they feel something from it, not just the at face value. Well, and looking at art, I think it's in human nature to wonder who created it, not what created it, but who created it. And so if you had two, or identical pictures, or two pictures of the same subject, one was drawn by AI and one was drawn by a human, I think people would go for the latter. They would go for the one drawn by the human. And there's something to be said for there's kind of a warmth that a piece of art created by a human has that AI art doesn't. And I think going forward, analog, pen, paper art is actually going to be that's kind of going to be the ultimate expression, because it's something that the AI can't do. It's not digital at all. It's this analog expression will be kind of even more valuable than it has been.
Yeah, I can understand how the artificial artwork wouldn't have the same depth, because I know personally, and so many other people, specifically in the Zelda community, but wider communities as well, your work on games like Majora's Mask, such as the moon's face, or the design of Majora's Mask, or the design of Fierce Deity's mask, has caused so many hours of discussion amongst fans. What was the reasons for the decisions you made? What are the emotions you were trying to evoke? Which is something that can only really exist if you know that there was a human behind the pen rather than a computer. So I just wanted to say again, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me. And like I said at the top, you are such a massive inspiration to me and so many others in the Zelda and gaming community as a whole. And yeah, I wanted to know, is there anything next after Omega 6, the Triangle Stars?
I think the thing I most want to do is have the international release of Omega 6 so really, really well, so people start telling me, hey, we need you to make a sequel.
Okay, let's hope that happens. I'm sure it will. Thank you so much for your time, and James, you too, Alistair, everyone, for arranging this call. Thank you all so much, and take care. So that's the end of my interview with Takaya Imamura. I'm so incredibly grateful to the people who made this interview possible, and of course to Imamura-san himself for taking the time to chat with me. Like I said to him, this man's work has inspired so many people, and given so many more nightmares, and it was such a humbling experience to be able to talk to one of the key figures behind one of my favourite video games. I hope you all enjoyed listening to our conversation, and I hope you'll forgive any nervousness on my part. This is the first interview I've ever conducted with someone like this, and I'm not gonna lie, I was pretty starstruck. Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe for more Zelda content, and I'll see you next time.